Welcome to our SB9 information session hosted by the League of Women Voters of the Torrance area. My name is Gloria Gutierrez. I'm the Natural Resources Director and Land Use Director for the League of Women Voters of the Torrance area. And we had a lot of interest in finding out more about SB9 and its impacts. Tonight's event is called SB9. Will it impact your neighborhood and um, was it reduce affect the housing crisis? So what I'd like to do is introduce um, our panelists who both have current and background in housing and its impacts. Um, we have Jack Messerlian. He's a former Torrance City Council member, 1994 to 2002, planning commissioner from 1984 to 1992, and a uh, Parks and Recs um, commission from 92 to 94, as well as Elizabeth Pino, who is a current planning commissioner from 20 to 22, 2020 to 2022. Uh, and was on the Cultural Arts Commission from 2018 to 2020. So lots of background and knowledge about the way the Planning Commission works and how housing is in Torrance, and with lots of knowledge about what we could be seeing as a result of SB9 or what it is. So I'd actually like to, I don't know if we can get started with the very first question. So I'm going to ask a question, and if you feel that you would like to answer that one, just give me a little raised hand and we'll get that going. One second. Here we go. First question is, who would like to share what is SB9 and what does it do? And any purpose behind the law? As it did pass just in September 2021. So it's a recent addition to our laws here in California.
Mr. Messerlian, would you like to start and I'll
continue? Yeah, well, I'll take a crack at it. Well, SB9 came about authored by member Atkins, and it was culmination of previous efforts, specifically SB50 by Senator Scott Wiener, who had been trying for quite a while to come up with some sort of mechanism to produce more housing. His previous efforts failed, but eventually when SB9 was introduced, Ms. Atkins made several amendments that was palatable to the committee and then eventually passed and the governor signed. Basically, what SB9 does is it allows a homeowner in a single family zone to add another unit, or you can split the lot whereby you can do 2 units on each lot. There are some restrictions, obviously, and one of which is that the newly created lot can't be less than 40% of the size of the lot. So what that translates to, such as in the city of Torrance, let's say the average size lot is about 6,000 square feet. So 40% of that, so any newly created lot can't be less than 40% of the 6,000, which is 2,400 square feet. So if you create a new lot, and if your lot is 6,000 square feet, it can't be less than 2,400 square feet. And then there are some other requirements as well. That's it couldn't have been used, the existing house couldn't have been used for rental purposes. And that the owner must have been living in the units. And these are some of the other requirements.
Thank you. Thank you. So my next question has to do with what sorts of changes might we start to expect as a result of SB9? Go ahead, Liz. Let me unmute you.
Okay, because it's not allowing. You know, before we go into that, I think it's also important to mention that over the last year, the state enacted several legislations to address the housing crisis. And although the California Senate Bill SB9 received most of the attention, other important laws promoting increased density were enacted. So in essence, you wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things that we're doing right now without SB10, which is zoning, and that's also important, without AB 345, which requires agencies to allow ADU to be sold separately. It's also important, you know, part of SB9. And also SBH 4778, which prohibits local agencies from imposing a floor area ratio standard. So although SB9 received most of the attention, these laws are also important, and they were enacted 5 months ago with SB9. So just wanted to add that as well. And another thing that I would like to add is that it cannot be in a, just going with what the council member said, it cannot be in a historic district or be a historic property. So you cannot do an ADU on that parcel. The parcel, it must be located with half a mile of a high quality transit corridor. And a few other things, but I think we can get into that in the next question.
Okay, thank you. So what are the biggest
What was your
changes?
other question? What was your next question?
Well, this question was, what are the biggest changes we can expect to see as a result of SB9? So I don't know if we got to hear what changes we might expect from SB9.
Well, as far as changes, obviously, if you have neighbors who are adding units to their single-family dwelling, or they're splitting their lots, which is going to add 4 units in essence, and then on a lot that had only a single-family dwelling. So if you see a series of neighbors, let's say on your street, doing this, all of a sudden the character of the neighborhood changes from a single-family dwellings to multi-family dwellings. So that's in essence changing the character of your street or your neighborhood, so to speak. That's the major change that you're going to be able to see. Obviously, besides that, when you have, instead of, let's say, you have 2 cars in a single family dwelling, all of a sudden you have 4 dwellings, and each one, let's assume they're going to have 2 cars. So now you have 8 cars for that particular lot. So instead of 2, you have 8. So if you have a whole bunch of neighbors doing this, then the number of cars and vehicles is going to be increased on your street. So it's going to impact traffic. So these are naturally the impacts that you're going to be seeing that are going to be most visible, both in terms of people. You're going to have more people on the street, you're going to have more traffic, and perhaps some noise as well. So those are the immediate, the most visible changes that you're going to be able to see.
Okay, thank you. My next question has to do with the controversy. So this bill,
I think Liz has a.
Go ahead.
There's no way I can unmute myself. But the other thing I would add to that question is the fact that you now can build an ADU and it's by right. So there's a lot less paperwork. You might be able to do that in less time. And, at the Planning Commission, we used to see a lot more cases. And because now it's by right, we're not seeing those cases anymore. So that's one of the benefits or the changes that we are seeing right now.
Thank you. So my next question has to do with, the controversy, which I think is maybe too strong of a word, but there was a lot of people unhappy with the bill, a lot of people who are happy with bill. What do you think is making it such a difficult one for people to accept or to be happy with or to help understand? Because I think, at least for me, the first 4 people I asked about what SB9 was, I got 4 completely different answers. And so it seemed at first people weren't understanding it or what it was really going to do. And think even knowing it's making it hard for them to decide that they're okay with it. So what do you think is making it the most difficult for people to want this in their neighborhoods?
Well, I mean, by and large, we're all, if we live in single-family homes, we're accustomed to quiet neighborhoods. We're accustomed to our lifestyle and quality of life, and all of a sudden, this increasing number of units is going to impact that, so to speak, that quality of life. I mean, that's the single most important factor. The other, from a policy maker standpoint, and as well as from a civic standpoint, it's usurpation of local zoning control. I mean, we pride ourselves in having control over our local affairs, and now we have the state telling us that this is how it's going to be, and that's this is all ministerial approval. I mean, this splitting the lot and building the additional units and so forth are all ministerial, meaning that it doesn't require any planning commission approval. So it's all at the staff level. So at least at the planning commission level, you have a public hearing where the interested public is able to come and voice their concerns, whereas the other way around, at the staff level, yeah, I mean, I suppose that you can voice your concern, or you can email or write to the staff or call them and tell them that you're unhappy about it, or you're happy, so to speak, whatever the case may be. But the likelihood of that happening is probably not strong or not as good as if it were, let's say, a public hearing before a decision-making body like the Planning Commission.
Correct. And to that, I would add that cities are losing control over land use, like the council member said, and planning and zoning laws are a matter of municipal affairs. And the fact that now California is imposing on a city like Torrance alone, they're imposing that we must build 5,000 homes by the year 2030. And the argument here is that we are a built out city, and there is not much space here. Sure, building more ADUs might help alleviate that, but more cars, more density. So those are a lot of those are some of the reasons why it's so controversial right now for many people.
Thank you. So another question had to do, I mean, we're talking about potential impacts. When do you think we might start seeing those a little bit more? So, Mr. Messerlian, you were talking about increased traffic, increased cars, change the character, more people. I mean, how much time do you think it'll take for us to start really seeing those changes?
Well, it's interesting as to how many units, how many lot splits, or that's the worst case scenario, let's say in a single family neighborhood where the lots are being split, or that someone is adding 2 units. So without splitting the lot. But I think it's we forget sometimes that there's a interplay of economics as well. And what I mean is a financial interest involved. If you obviously, if you want to split the lot to create more units because you're concerned about the housing need and so forth, and you want to be a good citizen, but by and large, perhaps, I mean, that's well and good. But the other factor is that people might be interested in having additional income by having 4 units where they're creating rental units from which they're going to derive income. So there's the financial aspect of this whole thing. Now, in a place like Torrance or the beach cities or other communities where you have fairly stable housing stock and fairly well-established neighborhoods, where the housing prices are very high, and I'm not so sure that there's going to be that incentive for people to split their lot or create more additional units. Because as is, the lot itself, the house right now, the house on a single family dwelling in a good neighborhood is going to fetch quite a bit of money. So the financial incentive is not there to create that additional unit or split the lot, if you will.
Thank you.
Are still on the D, or I'm sorry, I lost the question.
Oh, this one has to do with when we can expect to see the impacts. So, what would we be looking at? And it sounds like that question was directed at what we might see in Torrance specifically. Although, as the League of Women Voters of Torrance area, we actually do cover 5 different cities. So we might see differences in each of the impacts, depending on homeowners and whether they decide to move forward with building on their lots, whether they can qualify. My next question had to do with SB9's impact. So it was designed to help increase the housing supply, in some ways to help reduce the impacts of our housing crisis in California. Do you see any changes or ways that could have been designed differently that would make it more effective at its purpose? Which I know is kind of a hard question because
well, I mean, it's yes and no. Well, first of all, the legislature could not have been as the directive, if you will, coming from the state couldn't have been as harsh as those who are opposed to SB9 feel, in that they could have left it alone and for local jurisdictions to come up with the program. As is right now, the state is holding basically, over the local jurisdictions, the threat of holding funding unless they come up with this additional housing, if you will. And that's one of the reasons that the local jurisdictions are under the gun to revise their housing elements, which is like I believe Liz already mentioned that the city of Torrance is right now in the process. As a matter of fact, the housing elements, updated housing element for the 6th cycle, which is what the housing element is addressing from 2021 to 2029. It's for the 8-year period. It's going to the city council on Tuesday. The planning commission already approved it, gave its stamp of approval on May 18th, I believe. And it is on the council's agenda on Tuesday for approval as well. Basically, the bottom line is that the city of Torrance is under the gun to produce during the housing period, not necessarily produce, but identify. The state is not telling local jurisdictions that you have to build 5,000 units. It's not telling the city of Torrance that you have to build 5,000 units during that period, but you have to identify sites where that housing can be produced. I think there's a fine distinction, fine line that sometimes we forget. Anyway, I'll let Liz.
Thank you.
Yes, Incorrect. Thank you so much for the clarification. To identify, that's what we did at the previous planning commission with the housing element. We identified areas in the city of Torrance where we can, say, okay, there are places where we can do this, such as churches, parking lots. That's one, and then with ADUs in other areas. So thank you.
All right, and then I have just one final question, though then we might be able to open it up to the audience. Do you expect any challenges to the law?
Well, the challenge has already been filed. As you will know, City of Carson, Redondo Beach, and Torrance filed a lawsuit. City of Pasadena is challenging the Attorney General, if you will, because the Attorney General has come down on Pasadena, and I suppose that they want to make a test case out of Pasadena and other jurisdictions as well. There are a couple of movements right now, organized movements by cities against SB9. As to where it's going to go, we don't know. And right now, it's the law. As the government has signed SB9, it's in the books, it's the law until there's an amendment to it, or it's struck out of it's no more the law, or there's some sort of a statewide measure that's going to change the law. We don't know. But now, having said that, as to how many units do we expect that this law will produce is the big question mark. The Turner report that was done by UC Berkeley, and it was funded by some wealthy folks who are in the development business. They assume, or the report said that about 700,000 units may be produced. I believe that's a correct number by this law, by SB9. In my opinion, that's a fairly broad, and overly optimistic assessments. I don't believe that that's going to be the case, but then who knows? We may be surprised. But in the city of Torrance, according to the housing elements, that's the draft housing elements, they estimate that perhaps about 450 to 500 units may be produced, at best during the 8-year planning period. So remains to be seen.
Okay. So those are actually all the questions I had, but I do see that there is a question in the audience. Let me open up the floor to Mr. Jose.
Hi, actually, my name is Amy Josephek. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi there. So thank you for all of this. Yes, there are many, as Mr. Messerlian said, there are organizations. Many of us have been working for a couple of years at this point. Our biggest problem is that the pretense was that these bills were going to fix the affordable housing crisis. And interestingly, in the many, many dozens of bills that have now become law in the last couple of years, that word affordable doesn't actually appear in any of them. This is a set of laws that, and I know there are some realtors on here who love to have more units to rent and sell, and that's great. The problem is that these are laws that are designed to give developers freer rein in what they can build. There is no requirement for a single affordable unit, and there is nothing affordable that will come from these. We've done analysis that shows that even if it's at 10 or 15% of each development, it will never be enough affordable units. And so the problem is that the support of these being done on the pretense of affordable housing is really difficult for us to handle. Also, there's this little thing called a drought. And so I would encourage people to look up ourneighborhoodvoices.com, which is one of the organizations that's calling for affordable housing as opposed to just blatant, more mid-level market rate and luxury housing. We have an organization in Torrance called California Cities for Local Control. There's an organization called Livable California, and United Neighbors is another one. And there's an awful lot of people that are working hard. It is very controversial. We are working to have something put on the ballot for November 2024. That would basically roll back and say cities have the right constitutionally in California to direct their own land zoning usage. And people should know that once upzoning happens, you cannot downzone again. So I would just ask people to pay attention to the reality of these laws and get involved with groups that are working to really find ways to actually build affordable housing, like in commercial areas where it's already zoned for water and for transportation, not in the middle of single family blocks. Sorry.
Did you have a question or?
Well, I was saying, because Mr. Messerlian was talking about that there are organizations that are working with it. And so I think it's not a question as much as letting people know that there are indeed big issues surrounding these laws, and people should pay attention and do research and work to figure out ways to actually create affordable housing as opposed to more luxury housing that will do nothing to create affordable housing.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. We are looking for questions. Go ahead, Mr. Messerlian.
Yeah, I'm glad that she mentioned the fact that in SB9, there isn't a single word about affordable housing. That is absolutely correct. And if the whole intent was to create affordable housing, well, that's not what the intent, that's not what this is going to accomplish. The other thing is, but when you look, the reason that we have zoning, the reason that we have general plans and so forth is to make sure that our cities have orderly development. Otherwise, you have haphazard development. So if the intent was to create more housing, why usurp local control by forcing this onto the R1 zoning or whatever the low density zoning of any jurisdiction is? But allow multiple family upzone in the multiple family zones. For instance, in the city of Torrance, in the R3 zone, you're allowed 27 units to the acre, which comes to 1 per 1,600, 1 unit per 1,600 square foot of lot area. So if that's the intent to create more housing, why don't you just upzone that 27 units to the acre, let's say to 35 units to the acre, so that you create more units on a zone that allows multifamily dwellings and leave R1 alone. There's a reason why we create the zoning designations. I mean, otherwise, if we're going to increase housing, produce more housing, then you should be able to put the housing in any zone, and therefore there's no reason for these different zoning designations. Which, by the way, I believe Liz mentioned, SB10 does. You can have, if you are on a transit-oriented, if you have a piece of property which is near a transit, then whatever the zoning is, you can create up to 10 units on that lot. So regardless of what the zone is.
We had a question from Athena.
May I just add something, Gloria, that I am happy and proud to say that actually the city of Torrance, we are really working on something that is, I encourage everyone to look into this, it's the housing corridor study. And this is with Senate Bill 2. The city of Torrance received a grant, and right now we are in the process of identifying areas in the Hawthorne area, because the grant only allows for certain areas. So we're hoping to expand this in the future. But with the housing corridor study, we're hoping that we can create more housing here in the city of Torrance. So yeah, you can find that on the website, the city torranceca.gov.
All right, thank you. I think we might have just one or two more questions as we get to our time here. So I'm going to open the floor to Miss Athena Paquette. She had a question.
Hi there. Well, thank you so much. I joined late, so if my questions are repeats, I apologize, but I'm so glad, Jack, you joined us and are available to do this. And I'm so glad to meet Ms. Pino. This is exciting. And thank you for the work you like hit the ground running, I guess, in your job. So thank you very much for helping us understand more of this. And thanks to all my friends who joined us tonight. So, and you kind of touched on this. My curiosity is, where is the land, or where are the properties? Have you identified properties that could be that the zoning could be changed to accommodate more affordable housing? And where is, I know the city has a lot of property. I mean, certain politicians running in this cycle were very proud to say that, hey, the city has a lot of property. We're the greatest real estate owner of any city around, apparently. So I don't know how true that is, but I know we do own a lot of property. So my question is, how much of that property could be converted to open to affordable housing? And then my second question was more for Ms. Pino, is how does SB9 impact the job? And this is really kind of my concern, is we have a planning commission for a reason, to fulfill our city plan, to make sure that we don't overdo things, underdo things. What, how is this impacting your job as someone who's supposed to protect and guard the city's, plan for smart development? So I know it's two questions, but I'm, number one, curious, where is the land to help affordable housing? Because I know, thank you, I know the governor wants every city to have a certain amount of affordable housing. So that question, then Ms. Pino, how this impacts your job as a commissioner.
Well, the land, we have here the housing element of 2021 and 2029. So you can find it here. I'm trying to find a map, because as the council member said, we identify many areas, but it's all over Torrance. So it's just hard to give you, but mostly you might see them mostly on the Hawthorne corridor, some of the hillside area, the hillside overlay with the churches, like parking lots, and then in R1 zones that you can just split. Is that was your question, correct?
Well, I was just wondering how much land or how much property that the city actually owns itself. It's on title, it owns that property. How much of that can be converted to affordable housing? Have they identified land that they would be willing to change the zoning on and create affordable housing? Are there, without impacting, which I know that's a big what if, but without impacting the neighbors around them?
So you mean city-owned property, right?
Yeah.
Council member, would you like to add on that, and then
Well,
we'll look into this?
Let me, Athena, if you're interested, Liz was holding the housing element, the draft housing element. You go up page 995, you have a listing of the properties, about 7 locations, I believe 7 locations that they've identified where housing could be built. Let me make a couple of points.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this doesn't have to be city-owned property. For instance,
Right.
one of the locations is Madison and Lomita on the north side. There's a large, I believe, about 7 to 10 acre property there that has a church, a bunch of industrial uses and so forth. So there, the city is thinking of rezoning that property, same as well with the other properties. So it'll be a zone change, if you will. The properties will have to be, will undergo a zone change to allow the housing. And these are all, I submit to you, these are probably all privately owned properties. As to how the property owner is going to react to his property being rezoned is another question. So we're going to have to wait and see how the process evolves. What was your other question, Pino?
Well, to Ms. Pino, but to follow up on this, is it possible that the city would, because we have a large responsibility to fulfill these affordable housing units.
Okay.
Is it possible that they would eminent domain private property to make this work?
Let me answer that question as well. Now, as far as the housing need of the city, of the 5,000 units that the city will have to produce over the cycle during the next 8 years, identify sites or produce housing, if you will, if the private sector is building these units. Of that 5,000 units, according to our records and RENA, 17% is for very low income, 30% is for low income, 17% for 30% for moderate income, and 17% for above moderate income. And the income is obviously based on the area median income levels. So it's at the low end, at the high end, it's 17%. At the mid level, the low income and the moderate income each is at 30%. So there isn't that much of a need of you other than obviously 17% is a decent percentage at the very low income level. And it is estimated that the ADUs and the SB9 units will probably have more, will meet the needs of the very low and the low income households.
Okay, thank you. And just for people to
let me give you two projects.
in LA County, the AMI in LA County is like 103, right? 103,000. And then a lot of things are 80% of that. So yeah, so it's the lower end that's really the concern, right? How do you make it affordable for the low end?
And right now there's a great deal of demand as well for market rate housing, rental housing. And that's why you have this pent up demand and production of multifamily dwellings. Currently in the real estate market, I can tell you that the hottest sector right now in the real estate community is warehouses and multifamily developments. That's hot. And you won't believe the price of land for industrial, where you can build a warehouse, how much right now the going rate is per square foot. Whereas before, in the old days, it was probably about $20, $30.
Right.
In a place like City of Torrance, if you can find a location, a builder or a big time developer can find a location where they can build a warehouse. Recently, Rexford Properties, they pay $200 a square foot for industrial property. I mean, it's the price is just going through the roof.
And do you think multifamily is really the way to solve the affordable housing? Because this ADU thing, it's lovely, it's great for investors, it's great for homeowners that need help, but really it's the multifamily that solves the problem, I think. And I see that, you know, I do a lot of interviews with people that are doing manufactured homes, and they're just stacking these things. And you see this in Hollywood, the West Side is doing it already. Should we be allowing that in our city, is to, you know, have 400 square foot dwellings stacked on top of each other as a multifamily?
Well, unfortunately, what's happening is that a lot of cities, in order for them to meet their housing quota and meet their RENA numbers, they're doing, for instance, in next door in City of Gardena, just recently approved in the last, well, they just approved one. It's in the process of building, and another one just was built, what we call SRO housing, which is a single room occupancy units. These are small, I mean, tiny, small, like 300-400 square foot units, just so that they can meet their numbers. I mean, that's where the problem is. The fallacy of this whole thing is that in order for the city not to be under the gun, they're doing this. By the same token, in a place like in a highly desirable community such as Torrance, we're producing housing. For two projects, I can tell you, two projects. One of which is the former the bowling facility on Hawthorne and Sepulveda. And that's going to be a couple of hundred, I believe, close to about 200 units. And then there's obviously the former Montgomery Ward site next to the mall, the long wall. That's going to be a couple of hundred units. Now, as to whether any of those units are going to be affordable remains remains to be seen, which I highly doubt that they will be, because these are very desirable locations and these are going to be well-built units. So, and like I said, there's demand for market rate housing by people, by high-income folks, especially the younger generation, who can afford it, professionals who can afford these units, to pay $2,000-3,000 a monthly rent.
All right, thank you, Mr. Messerlian, and thank you, Elizabeth Pino, for your answers tonight. I believe that we've reached the conclusion of our time, and I appreciate you providing your time for us to answer these really tough questions about the change, the new law, and what we can expect from it. What I want to just mention to the attendees tonight, thank you so much for participating in your democracy and learning more about these really important things that are will be impacting our the character of our cities. What I'd of course like to ask you is if you'd be willing to join our membership. We are always looking for new members to be part of the League of Women Voters of the Torrance area, and to participate in helping us put on more events like this and others. So thank you all for joining us for tonight. And we welcome you, of course, to join our membership. You can go to our website at www.lwvtorrancearea.org and sign up.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night.